Hey everybody, John Parks at Florida State University. So glad that you stopped by the Zildjian website to talk about cymbal playing, one of my favorite things. I think the reason that I've always enjoyed it so much is because there are very few instruments, either as a percussionist or someone in the orchestra, that can really define how an orchestra sounds like a cymbal player can. I mean, you have so many different choices of instruments and so many different ways to play them, and it really does do a lot to enhance the orchestra's overall sound. So it's always been something that's really important to me, both as a player and as a teacher. Keith asked me to talk a little bit about some of my favorite cymbal players, so maybe we'll start with that. I love Michael Buxbaum's playing with Philadelphia. That to me is kind of the textbook and one of the very first sounds that I really got hold of and wanted to try and emulate. Patsy Dash in Chicago, Jim Ross in Chicago. Patsy was the first teacher really to teach me how to play the cymbals and to show me all the different kinds of sounds that one can be capable of with the right instruments. And so that was a really important part of my career when I was young, not only because we could work on it in lessons, but because I could go down to Orchestra Hall and see her play with CSO, and that was a really important thing. So especially younger students, anytime you can get off stage and go out into the hall and listen to your colleagues, that's going to be a huge education, whether it's just supporting them in their concerts or just being out there when you're not playing on stage to give them some feedback. I think that's where you learn a lot about what cymbals actually sound like. Other players, John Beck was a huge influence when I was at Eastman. So that was definitely a huge part of my education there. And the students and I spent a lot of time picking instruments and going out when we were playing with Eastman Wind Ensemble on tour and listening to each other on stage and trying to decide which cymbals were going to be the best for certain situations. Also, like a lot of younger players, Cynthia Ye in Chicago, also Matt Strauss in Houston, Glenn Paulson, I love his playing with the Marine Band. He's just a killer. I saw him at PASIC a few years ago, and Matt too. I saw him, we played in Key West together, and I've also seen him at PASIC Cymbal Labs, and he's just an excellent player and has tons and tons of beautiful sounds and colors. As far as cymbal crash types and things like that, when I think about the kinds of sounds that I want, I basically divide it down into 4 subgroups. Now, people have different ways of thinking about this. This is just my way, so take it or leave it. But I think of it as cadential, which are typically big release points. They're usually really loud, where I'm going to use a large cymbal, something like 19s, 20s, 22s, etc. Thinking like Strauss, tone poems, Mahler symphonies, that kind of literature. Typically, those are going to be really, really big. And I've got a recording of Heldenleben with Philly that has one of my favorite cymbal crashes of all time on it. So that's definitely one to check out. And then, of course, after that, you've got repeated crashes, like you might have in Capriccio Espagnol or in Stars and Stripes, something like that. Then you have short crashes, like you would use maybe for Romeo and Juliet, parts of Tchaik 4, etc. And of course, we're not talking about every single crash. We're not going to talk about special effects or zings or dings or anything like that. And then, of course, your soft crashes. Sometimes they're repeated, like in Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. Sometimes they're just single, like you might have in Symphonie Fantastique or in Peter Grimes, something like that. I also thought that it might be really fun just to go next door and look at some of the instruments that I like and talk a little bit more about general sound concepts. And I think one of the most important factors in those two is that with each one of those kinds of crashes, you have a certain kind of sound that typically you're after. For me, the big cadential crashes, it's all about blossom. Some people call it bloom, but it's that whoosh that comes out after the initial attacks are made. And I think that there are a lot of great Chicago and Philly recordings where that's exactly what happens, and that's a sound that I've tried to emulate a lot. As far as the repeated ones, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that, but most people will think of them more as a cha sound, so that you have a little bit more articulation on the front so that the time is clear, especially in a march. And then, of course, for the shortened crashes, the way that I like to think of them is just as though I were playing a big crash, a big cadential crash. I just stop it with my ample stomach in order to keep it from ringing on. And then, of course, with the soft ones, I mean, basically you can, up like this, down like this, over like this, however you want to do it. And those aren't really so much they're not so much like the repeated crashes, but there does have to be just maybe a little bit of cha on the front of it, just again for articulation and timing with the orchestra. So without any further ado, how about we go next door, take a look at a few things, and we'll go from there. All right. Yes, these are my 16-inch classic orchestrals, medium light. I really like these a lot, especially for soft repeated crashes like Rachmaninoff, Peter Grimes, etc. The soft crashes in Berlioz, soft crashes in Mahler 4, etc. These are really nice for that. Here I've got my 17-inch medium lights. I like these a lot too. I found that I use them more as suspendeds recently than I've actually used to play any kind of crash with them, but they're really beautiful. And if you're playing an audition and you want something that's not going to be quite as heavy as a pair of 18s, some people choose to use 17s for pieces like Chike 4 or Night on Bald Mountain, and these are a great choice for that, although you might want to think about the medium heavies as well. Here I've got my 18-inch classic orchestral medium lights. Like these a lot, and also like the medium heavies a lot, and end up using them for a lot of general cymbal playing. Here I've got the first pair of Zildjian orchestral cymbals that I ever bought. These are my 19 medium lights, and I bought these probably 1995, I think. So I've had them for about 15 years, and one of the things that you find about your cymbals is that they start to change over time, and these things have just become very buttery and easy to play, and sometimes when you're playing cadential crashes you don't even hear an attack on them. They're just like butter. Same thing for these. These are my 20-inch classic orchestrals, and I love these for Shostakovich, for some Mahler crashes. And then, of course, I put these in the big boy chair just because they're massive. These are my 22-inch medium heavy classic orchestrals. I love these. I use them a lot for the Ends of Pines of Rome. I mean, really, really big crashes where you're not going to have to repeat, so you can let the blossom go for a while. I like these a lot. The classic orchestrals in general I find to be a very, very clean sounding cymbal, both in blossom and in repeated crashes. And I tend to like them a lot, and our wind orchestra conductors here tend to like these a great deal. Now over here we have some Ks that I'm really crazy about. These are the K vintage orchestral medium heavy and medium light cymbals. These are 16s, and Keith Aleo picked these out for me. And I use the light one on top and the heavy one on the bottom, so it gives me a really interesting sound combination. I love using these for Rachmaninoff. They're a little bit harder to play sometimes than the 16-inch classic orchestrals, but with practice you can get pretty proficient with them and consistent. We used these on a recording of Shostakovich 9 several years ago, and they turned out great at the end of that last movement. Here I've got my 18-inch. These are special selections. Love these for repeated crashes, Chike 4, especially Russian literature. I've just enjoyed using these for a wide variety of things. Down here I've got the K Symphonics, which are just really heavy and thick and very old world sounding, which I also like a lot. I think of some of Joe Adato's playing with Cleveland, and if I listen to Vienna and Berlin, this is kind of the cymbal that I like to think about. And then over here I have my 20-inch. These are just the 20-inch medium lights. Love these, use them a lot. All of these are a lot darker sounding in character than the A's are over here, or the classical orchestrals. But I really like these a lot. If you listen to the Eastman Wind Ensemble Live at 50 recording on Porgy and Bess at the very end, that big cymbal crash from live in Japan in Opera City, that's these cymbals. So if you like that, then you should check them out.